Now, there have been times in my life, and I'm sure in your life too, when I've just felt that my problems are just too much. When when that happens, we become so inward focused that we can't even see what God is doing around us. And that it's in those moments, that's when we need perspective. And perhaps, this COVID pandemic has done that to you. It's kind of caused you to look inward completely, and you've lost sight on what God is actually doing. And perhaps you've like many others have gone into a bit of an emotional spiral. Well, if that's the case, allow me to give you a bit of perspective. Imagine, if you would, that you were born in the year 1900. That means that on your 14th birthday, now the reason I'm doing this is because when we're so inward focused, we tend to think that we are the only ones who are experiencing tough times. But that's not the case. So if you were born in 1900, on your 14th birthday, World War One starts. And that war continues until your 18th birthday. 22 million people die during that war. Later in that year, the year that World War One ended, the Spanish flu epidemic breaks out. And that continues until you turn 20. 50 million people die from the Spanish flu in those 2 years. That's twice as many people who died in the First World War. When you turn 29, the Great Depression begins. Unemployment hits 25% worldwide. And that continues until you are 33. When you turn 39, World War II breaks out. You're 39. You're in your second war. Between your 39th and your 45th birthday, 75 million people are killed during the war. Smallpox was an epidemic right up until the time you were in your 40s. Smallpox killed 300 million people during your lifetime. When you turn 50, the Korean War starts. 5 million people die in that war. From the time you were born until you are 55, you live with the fear of polio epidemics breaking out every summer. You experience friends and family who fall ill of polio. They contract polio and they live with the fear of becoming paralyzed or even dying. At 55, the Vietnam War breaks out. And that doesn't end for another 20 years. 4 million people die during that war. Then there's the Cold War. You live during the time of the Cold War with this constant dread of when is a nuclear war going to break out? And then on your 62nd birthday, there's the Cuban Missile Crisis. The tipping point for the Cold War. And so would you like me to carry on? Some people have experienced a really rough time their entire life. We are not the only generation that are experiencing difficulties. And this is one of the many reasons why I love reading the Bible. Because in the Bible, We read these stories of people who have faced really challenging times. And not only do we read about the fact that they faced difficult situations, but we get to learn from how they coped, how they dealt with their situations. And there's so many lessons that you and I can learn from them. The life of Joseph contains many of those difficult situations, but then lessons in learning how you and I can cope. So let's have a look at the life of Joseph. Now, Joseph was born to his father when his father was very old. And his father had 2 wives, 2 concubines, and his one wife was his favorite. And she only had 2 children. Joseph was the oldest, the firstborn from his father's favorite wife. And so already, that would kind of give you a clue as to the fact that he was daddy's favorite. And not only that, but when his mother was giving birth to his youngest brother, it was only the 2 of them, Joseph and Benjamin. His mother died in childbirth. So Joseph was dad's favorite. And he grows up, and when he's a teenager, God gives him a dream. And in this dream, he sees these sheaves of grain, and each one of his brothers has a sheaf, and their sheaves of grain bow down to his. And because he's a teenager, he's not thinking straight, he's not thinking rationally. He goes and tells his brothers, who already have issues with him because he's daddy's favorite, he tells them his dream. This just turns them completely against him. And then, he has another dream. And in this dream, the sun and the moon, in other words, his mother and father, and all the stars bow down to him. You can just kind of imagine what the family dynamics were at that stage. So anyway, the other siblings, Joseph had 11 brothers. They are out looking after the sheep, and his dad sends him to take them some supplies, find out where they are, how they're doing. And so he goes off, and from a distance, his brothers see him coming. Perhaps it was the colorful robe that he was wearing, that robe that set him apart as the favorite son. But they saw him and they concocted a plan. They said, when he comes, we're going to kill him. And long story short, they decided not to kill him. Instead, they sold him to some slave traders. And he was taken off to Egypt. The brothers then, took that robe of his. They killed a goat, dipped it in the blood of the goat, went back to their father and said, this must have been Joseph's. He didn't arrive, but we imagine some wild beast caught him and killed him, and terribly sorry, Dad, but your favorite son is dead. Meanwhile, God is still with Joseph. And Joseph gets sold as a slave, but not just to anyone, to the man who was very high up in Pharaoh's court, Potiphar. And God is with Joseph, and Joseph succeeds in everything that he does. And Potiphar eventually puts him in charge of his entire household. Now, Joseph did not go unnoticed to a certain lady in the household, none other than Potiphar's wife, who became wildly attracted to Joseph and attempted to seduce him. You can read that story for yourself, but the thing that stands out for me with this temptation is that Joseph, now remember, he's been taken away from his home. He's got no He doesn't, like you and I, have a Bible that he can turn to for comfort. He doesn't have a church that he can go to once a week. He's got no Christian brethren that he can phone when he's feeling down. He's completely on his own. But when he is faced with this temptation, he says, I can't do this because it would be a sin against God. Wow. Potiphar's wife still accuses Joseph of raping her or attempting to rape her. And so Potiphar, like it or not, he's compelled to throw Joseph in prison, which he does. And even in prison, God is with him. And so the prison warden, he sees that God is still blessing Joseph, and he puts Joseph in charge of the prison. Sometime later, there's two men who are thrown into the prison with Joseph. It's the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. And they have these dreams, and they tell their dreams to Joseph. And, Joseph interprets the dreams. He tells them God's interpretation of the dreams. And everything comes to pass exactly as Joseph said. And Joseph says to these men, just as they are being released, remember me. Please tell Pharaoh, I want to get out of this prison. 2 years go by. Joseph hears nothing from the cupbearer or the baker. Well, the baker was killed, as Joseph predicted. But he hears nothing until Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh could not find any wise man in his kingdom to give him the interpretation. And the cupbearer says, there's someone in prison who I think will be able to interpret this dream. And long story short, Pharaoh calls for Joseph, and Joseph says to Pharaoh, I can't, he's still humble at this stage. He's still a humble servant of God, which is just mind-blowing. But he says to Pharaoh, I can't interpret your dream, but I do know God, and God can give me the interpretation to your dream. Long story short, he gives Pharaoh the interpretation to the dream, and he gets made to be the second most powerful man in all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. But here's the question. How would you have fared if you were Joseph? Would you still be serving God at this stage? Let's just kind of put this in perspective again. By the way, what I'm going to go through now is actually a good test of how strong your faith is. So here it is. You are lifted out of your current situation, and you are planted right in the middle of a godless, pagan, hedonistic culture. You're separated from your family. You are stripped of your spiritual support system. Temptations are fired at you from every direction. You are treated unfairly again and again. How confident are you that you would continually demonstrate that you know, love, and serve God? Just one of those events is usually enough to get us to wallow in self-pity and begin to make excuses for our bad behavior. Joseph was able to handle all of these changes, all of these challenges, because his focus was not on his circumstance. His focus remained continually on God. If we are so focused on our circumstances, we are not going to be content with what life throws at us. We're not going to be able to handle change. And last week I mentioned, God is always doing something new. Think of it this way. Right now, many believers are waiting for churches to open up again so that we can get back to normal. Then I'll get my life right with God again, they think. But it's not going to be the way that it was before. Can you handle that? See, going back to church, it's not going to be the same as it was before. And I think if we try to pretend to have the same kind of meeting that we had before, we're going to be disillusioned. We are going to be disappointed because it's not the same. Things have changed and we need to move on. Albert Einstein said this: the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. Can we change? Paul the Apostle, he was not only willing to change, but listen to what he said to the church in Philippi. He said, but I focus. It's like, this is what I put my attention towards. I focus on this one thing: change. Wow. Well, he didn't word it like that, but that's essentially what he was saying. He said, I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. Friends, we are not going to be happy or content if we are continually wanting to hold on to the past, if we want to go back to the way things were. Let's be like Paul. Let's forget the past and focus on what lies ahead. Yes, the future is daunting. The future is scary because we don't know what it is. But let's forget the past and try to move ahead. When we do get back together for in-person meetings, please don't expect it to be the way that it was before. We need to look for the new thing that God is doing. Joseph didn't even have a church to go back to. Would you be willing? Are you able to worship God in a new environment, in a new way? I'm praying that we as a community of believers, that you and I as the church, and we've spoken many times about what that means, that the church is not the physical building. The church is the gathering of the believers. It's the ecclesia. It's the community. It's those who gather with a specific intention. That's us. We are the assembly of God. That's more than our denomination. It's who we are. It's our identity. Let's trust that when we gather, not only virtually, but when we gather in person, we will be able to give God the worth that He is due, that we would be able to hear from Him prophetically, and that we would be able to encourage one another, no matter what form or format that gathering may take. May God continue to bless you as you seek to live your life and to serve Him with your whole heart. May God bless you.